Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session number 6, believe it or not, of the Defender User Group. We're really thrilled to have you all here. We have really prepared an engaging session for you today, but before we dive in, here are just a few reminders. All Defender User Group, as you know, content and conversations are under the Chatham House rules. If you have not joined the Defender User Group LinkedIn, please make sure you take a moment to scan the QR code and become a member. And for any questions, topics, suggestions, if you're interested in being a guest speaker, if you have a guest speaker in mind you would like to recommend, please don't hesitate to reach out. I put my email address in there. We don't have Daniel Morris with us today, but he will be joining next session and he sends his regards. And if you have not had a chance yet to join or subscribe to the Defend Your Time podcast, where you can hear insightful conversation with like-minded professionals sharing their expertise in the security space, please do so. I have also put the QR code there for you. Great sessions that we have recorded in the last couple of months, both on Spotify and on iTunes as well. And now, into the fun part, I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Ian Haley. Ian is a proven leader and security architect who specializes in effectively leveraging the Microsoft Security Fabric and empowering his peers in information security to achieve impactful security outcomes. And as a father of 2 daughters, he knows a thing or two about risk management too. And so without further ado, thank you, Ian, for joining us today, and let's dive in.
Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here today. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared and we'll get this party started.
Wonderful.
All right, guys, is this okay? Can everyone see? I figure this is as easy as we can get it, and we're going to keep this very informal. Just reach out and interrupt me if there's anything you want to ask or talk about. So today we're going to talk about Logic Apps and Automation and elevating your SOC with Microsoft Sentinel. Why Microsoft Sentinel? Why are we even talking about this today? Well, the state of cybersecurity is looking pretty grim, guys. Nation-state threats, ransomware, the speed, scale, and sophistication of all of this is unprecedented as well. And what I mean by that is dwell time and things like that is getting shorter and shorter. And that's the time that they linger in your system after breaching before they actually pull the trigger on what they're trying to do. So they're getting quicker and more sophisticated, and it's getting scary. There's another one that I want to talk about that isn't really mentioned here, and this is insider risk management. So there's a couple different types of insiders. There's the accidental insider, the opportunistic insider. I've got them here. The disgruntled insider and the malicious insider. Has anybody accidentally found themselves in one of these by mistake? This is pretty common. Maybe somebody couldn't get that attachment to who they needed to at corporate email, so they did it over Gmail. They didn't mean any harm. That's an accidental insider. Have you got that poll handy, Wafa? All right. And then on top of, or now that I've scared you enough, managing a SOC has its own challenges as well. So you've got siloed technology. There's a lot of different tools and things like that that you're managing. Cost is kind of a concern no matter where you go. And then you have to worry about burnout. Your SOC analysts can get overwhelmed depending on the traffic and volume of alerts that they have to look at every day. So how do we handle some of these concerns? Let's turn to, you guessed it, Microsoft Sentinel. Here's what it does. It's it provides a cyber threat protection, investigation, response, and proactive hunting with bird's eye view across your entire enterprise. This delivers intelligent, comprehensive SIM and security orchestration, automation, and response. And that's where SOAR comes from. It collects, detects, investigates, and responds. So it can collect data from all of your different signals and tools and things like that, so they're no longer siloed, giving you a single pane of glass. It can apply detection rules and analytics rules against the signals that are coming in from those data sources. And then it can correlate them with AI and other tools to tie them together into some sort of an incident and detect malicious behavior. And then it has, with the SOAR capabilities, the ability to respond automatically. That takes a load off of your SOC. Let's talk about how we would do one of these things here in just a few moments. But moving on to, again, why choose Microsoft Sentinel for your SIM? It protects everything, just to drive the point home. It drives return on investment and helps you move faster. I've got some points here I want to make sure I get to. You don't want to just reduce your cost with ROI. You can maximize your value and manage your costs. So if you save a bunch of money by resizing or doing something like that, or with a DCR rule, you can reinvest that somewhere else to enhance your protection and maybe get enriched data sources. So that brings me to my next point, providing flexibility and driving efficiency. What are we automating today? So we're going to disable an entry user ID account if it commits some sort of an action, and we're going to go build a custom analytics rule to define that. It's essentially going to be a KQL query, and what it does is detect an event ID for a failed login attempt, and we can run that against the last 5-10 minutes and say if it happens more than 4 or 5 times in a minute, we know that's probably not a person, and we can lock the user's account out. And then we can minimize the impact on your SOC analyst further by updating the ticket automatically, so the SOC analyst knows that the user's account has been disabled. And we can automate an email out to that offending user's manager if they have one in Entra ID. So your SOC analyst just has to sit back, relax, and wait for the manager to come back and give an explanation, and whether to turn the account back on or not. Sound cool, right? How's everybody doing? I feel like I've been talking at everyone a lot. We're all right. Let's move on to the fun stuff. By the way,
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Great.
There's a lot more you can do with Logic Apps, by the way, than what we just described. So we're going to take a quick detour, and I'm going to show you something I built on kind of a side home project. This is a Raspberry Pi integrated soil sensor. The parts are about $7 a pop on Adafruit. I've got links over here and everything to where you can buy them. And with the new Bookworm OS, there's a lot of fun security updates I cover here in this article. But anyway, moving on, here is kind of a guide on how to get your Azure IoT Hub set up. Grab the strings, set up the Raspberry Pi, start to finish. And if you're interested in the Logic app to, like what I did with that next, I took the data from the Raspberry Pi, got it into an IoT hub, up to a service bus queue, and then into a log analytics workspace. Here's the measurements for my goat horn pictured here. It's a spicy pepper. Just some other fun stuff you can do with that. Let's run through how it works. So here is the Azure Logic App Designer. Show you how to get here. Just in Home, go to Logic Apps, and this is the one. When a message arrives in queue, writes the message to a string, parses it, and sends it from the hub up. It's really simple. The next part is where we get it to forward an email. This one runs on a timer because I don't really care if, like, once it starts to tell me my plants are too dry and they need water, I don't need it pinging me every 5 to 10 minutes with a new alert. So I have this one run every 4 hours. Grabs the information and runs this KQL query against these hard-coded thresholds for too high or too low when I want it to alert me. Does a quick parse, and I'm going to fly through this at a high level because we're going to dive in deeper on the next Logic app that we described earlier. Peppers out of bounds or out of condition, right? If they're above, if they go outside of the conditions that we described earlier, run them through this for each loop to make sure we grab the names. Put them through this one. Same thing, and it goes through this way in the decision tree. For moisture. Passes, it goes over here to true. I get an email that says soil moisture readings for this plant are high at approximately that. Please investigate. On the other side over here, it's pretty much the same thing, but for temperature. Curious what the end result looks like. Here's the email. All right, so that's all kinds of fun. Also, Halloween fun, something I want to sneak in here real quick. Here's another project I built out. If anybody's interested in Halloween stuff, I'll leave a link to that in the slide deck that you guys will have access to afterwards. Anyway, now that we've got the side stuff out of the way, let's go back here and get started. So before we can build a logic app and assign it permissions and do everything, we need to build a workspace and connect our connectors in. So go to create. I'm going to create a new one and call it UG. And it's as simple as that, right, guys? Spinning up a workspace. Now, that's easy, but there's nothing in it yet. While it's doing that, it might take a second. While it's doing that, let's explore well, I kind of want that to finish. Here we go. Perfect timing. Let's go to the resource. We've got nothing in here. Let's deploy Sentinel. As you know, Sentinel goes on top of a workspace. Create. There's the one we just did. Okay, now that we've got that built out, we need to connect stuff. So let's go to the Content Hub, and this is where Microsoft keeps its packaged pre-built solutions. And when I say solution, that means it's a combination of connectors, workbooks, and other fun content associated with the type of connector or solution. We're going to go to Enter ID because we're going to be looking for when a user fails a login. Here we go. Once this is installed, we need to confirm the logs that we want to send over. Here we go, manage. And once we're in here, here are the different things that are associated with this solution. These are a ton of different pre-built analytics rules. So you don't have to build these, you can just deploy them. And this will protect you against brute force attacks against a GitHub account or your Azure portal. Very specific. The one we're worried about today is this guy, I think. This one. Lock enter user ID. Let's create the playbook. Everything here looks good to me. I like to keep everything in the same user group or resource group. We'll worry about this stuff later on. They need to be configured afterwards. Create the playbook. And that puts this guy in here. So here's your Logic app for disabling a user. Let's talk about how it works. So at first, it reacts to an incident in Sentinel, and we'll talk about how to generate those soon.
Ian, there's a question
Yeah.
from Robert. What happens
Sure.
when you enable diagnostics logs? He said, I've heard a big bill.
Oh, yeah, a big bill. So I didn't really want any additional fluff or diagnostics going across just for this demo. But in a production environment, you would want to have that turned on to get additional insight and signals into your workspace for detections. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, all right, so this is calling across from an API. Once it gets everything, you want to pull the offending user account from the incident. And this is kind of cool how it does this. It does a concatenate, and it takes the username and then appends the UPN suffix to make the UPN, and we'll talk about that shortly here. Once it's got that, it passes it to a for each, because remember, there could be more users associated with the same incident if we group them. Here's the concatenation where it takes for each user that gets passed, it slaps a @ in between and then tags the UPN suffix. Then it applies this flag, which all of this information put together generates a URI that goes across the Graph API and disables the account. If no user was passed, this condition will just flag it and say, hey, we could not disable this user if this failed, and we want to know that if the automation failed. So we go over here in the decision tree, and we append the following note to the ticket in Sentinel. Playbook could not disable the user. Here's the error message. If the user is an admin, it didn't have privileges. And that's usually what happens is if it's an admin or something, it's going to fail, but it will tell you why. Another one is, all right, what happens if it was able to disable the user? The next step is we want to notify that manager, right? Here's the URI that it builds that I talked about earlier, and it uses the same thing in here for each user, or the UPN to stick into the middle of the URI. Uses the get method and pulls the user's manager from Entra, puts it in a string, and passes it on to the next condition. This is cool because if it couldn't find the manager, it's going to make a different note for your SOC analyst. User was disabled, but the manager has not been notified, not found. If it did find him, takes the user, makes the UPN suffix, so it can send the email, and it drafts an email like this. Actually, this is the incident, that it appends. Then it sends the email. I feel like the order should be switched here, but it updates the incident before it sends the email. However, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is how it came from the solution, so I'll let it be. Here's what the email looks like. Security notification. Your direct report has been disabled due to a security incident. Here's the information. And let's take a look at what the end result looks like. Adele V is my test user, and here's what the email came across like. Let's look at a successful run for this guy. Oh, that's a different one. Let's go to... This is the one that I've built and run before. And I like this because you can see what happens here. So it takes the input from the incident, passes everything across, the time, the users, the name of the incident, what type of alert, the priority. Then it goes and gets the user, as you can see here. It's the name and the UPN suffix and puts the @ in between. Remember account name. We'll talk about that later because it's important when we're building our analytics rule to make sure it grabs this so that we can concatenate those together to make the UPN suffix. Once we have our offending accounts from the incident, we put it through a for each loop because remember there could be multiple. This tries to update the user. Succeeded. This is where it throws the disable flag. Since it succeeded, it went this way, went to grab the manager. That's me, director of dictatorship. I run a tight ship, fellas. And moving on, it has to parse that and then pass it over. If there is no manager, add that note. If there is, grab the details, make this note. And that's what the email looks like that you saw earlier. Here. Very cool, right? And think about the time that saves not only your SOC, but the reaction time. If you build an analytics rule that is in NRT rule or a near real time, it runs about every minute to 2 minutes. So if somebody is doing and you can tune this to a different behavior. It doesn't have to be a failed login attempt. Maybe somebody breached a DLP policy and is exfiltrating data. They're uploading to a non-sanctioned storage like Gmail or something like that instead of Outlook or OneDrive. You can potentially disable the user's account before the upload is complete and then have their manager notified about it. And the SOC doesn't waste any time tracking down the manager and trying to figure out what happened. Pretty slick, right? Anyway, that all sounds really cool, but how do we put all this together? We need to have an analytics rule to generate the incident for the behavior we're looking for, and then we want to tie this to it to trigger it. Stop me if I'm moving fast, fellas. This is very casual. Just we can slow down anytime. Right now, we're going to go build that analytics rule. You go into Sentinel, down here to analytics. Here's the one that we've built. And there we go. So what this does is detect 3 failed login attempts within 2 minutes to generate an incident for a demo. You can map these, which is pretty cool, to different MITRE attack techniques if there's a custom one you want to build that you're aware of. Here's the rule logic. This is the fun stuff. This is where we get involved with KQL. If anybody's familiar with not familiar with KQL and they want to get started, here's a neat little KQL library of some of the most common questions I get asked on calls. Someone will say, hey, what's the cost of this event ID? You can copy and paste this guy and literally drop it in. And I try to comment everything out to explain what we're doing. And sometimes I'll have more than one version of the same thing. Here's another good one. What's the 90-day billable ingest? You just copy this guy and paste it over. Library in the links at the end of the slide deck as well. Anyway, moving back here, for sign-in logs, where the result type is this error code, 50126, that's for an invalid username or password and Entra ID. And we'll take any of those, summarize the number of failed attempts, right? We'll count them, and we'll summarize them by the user and the time generated, and split it out by 2 minutes. That way, if they fail 5 times within 2 minutes, that's how it's going to bring a result back. And if that shows up as more than 3, then we're going to generate an alert. Pretty straightforward. You can even actually test it with current data as well. It won't show up for me because I've already generated an incident. Let's take a look. Remember when I said, look at the name when we were concatenating things together and how we had to bring over the username and then concatenate the UPN suffix? It's really important that you do a little bit of enhanced entity mapping here for this to make sure that it captures that data and passes it on. Here, what we did was went to account data, and it was name and user principal name. Alert details. If you wanted to have a different name for what the alert should show up as, than what it is named in the general tab, you can do that here and have a separate description. And then we can have it run. I have this running every 15 minutes and then it looks back because I don't want to wait more than 15 minutes when I'm trying to generate data for a demo, right? We can have it start running immediately, the threshold as soon as it triggers and generates anything we want an alert. And then here's another part of being efficient for your SOC analysts. That's the whole point of automation, is saving that headache, right? So we want to group all of these types of events into a single alert so that you don't have 20 different tickets for the same thing and have all of your SOC guys tied up chasing the same thing. For this demo purpose, I wanted a separate one for each one, so that's why I did that. But let's move over this way to incident settings. We wanted to create an incident, and here's another smart way to group it. Maybe you've got the same user that's being targeted by brute force or password spray, so their alerts are being generated for the same account over the same workday for 8 hours. Maybe you want to group all of those into the same type of an incident instead of generating multiple ones. Important to configure this correctly. And here's where we can tie in and add our playbook that we built earlier or imported from the content hub in Sentinel. I don't want to do this now because I want to run it manually against our incident, but this is where, when you're generating the rule, if you know what you want to tie it to, you can put it in here. I'm not going to save anything because we've already built it. And then I had my user Adele Vance over here. You can see she's enabled. Try to log in a couple times with a bad password. It generated this incident. As you can see over here, there she is. And we're going to run our Logic app against that. It's running. Successfully triggered. That's just now. So, succeeded. Everything passed here. Check, check, check. Let's go check out her account. And she's disabled. Very fast, right? A human having to track some stuff down and log in and find the account and doing that might not have been as quick. And then getting the email out, updating the ticket. That's how we can leverage Sentinel to really elevate your SOC with the focusing on the security orchestration and automation and responses, the SOAR aspects. We covered a lot of stuff, guys. How does everybody feel? Everybody comfortable? Any questions that we can go back and revisit?
And feel free to unmute yourself and speak directly to Ian.
Oh, yeah, unmute yourself and talk. We're all friends here. If we've got time left too, what I'd like to do is go ahead and actually deploy this and handle all the permissions and things. I wasn't sure if we'd had time. We've already got a head start by deploying that app, so let's go back and take care of the rest of it. All in agreement?
Yeah, Ian, before you move forward, there's a question.
Yeah.
On the chat, can you explain about the why and how to configure manage identity API connections, API permissions, intra-app registrations?
Yes, that is exactly where I was about to go. Since we've just deployed that over here, the next thing we need to do is get in the DUG, we need to configure the permissions. Let's look at the one we've already configured so we can take a look and go to API. This is where we want to be really, really careful because this is the ability to disable a user. It's tempting just to give it admin access because you know GA can disable users, but that if that identity gets compromised, you're in a whole world of hurt. So we have to be really careful about this. So let's look at what we've got here. It's been authorized already. All right, so let's talk about this at the other Logic app. you'll notice in the Logic App Designer a bunch of red boxes. Here we go, invalid connection. This is because we don't have a proper connection with with a managed identity that has the appropriate permissions to look up the user's information in Entra ID to identify the manager. We need Graph API permissions to send email, and we need permissions to disable the account over the Graph API as well. Although none of this requires like a user account or anything, so MFA is not going to be a factor if anyone's worried about MFA breaking their Logic app down the road, unless you're using like a user-based account, but this is all through Graph API. Let's talk about how we got to do that. The way I like to do it is once you've built your Logic app, go in here to Overview. Where is it? It's in Identity here. This is the principal object ID for your Logic app. We need to run a PowerShell script to automate this because it's easier, right? Here's what the PowerShell script looks like. Let me zoom in for everybody. And there will be a link to this in at the end of this as well. So you need to run connect AZ account first to get to the right tenant. And then you would paste your that we got from here into here. You never change the Microsoft Graph app ID. And then here are the permissions that we're assigning. Read all to use the reader, directory read all, or user read all to be able to read the manager, directory read all to be able to read through the users, and then user enable disable account all. I may have gotten these permissions 1 and 2 mixed up. They do either one, but they're both required for the lookup before we go ahead and do the disable. Again, you could get away with just going one permission and giving it GA, but that's not principle of least privilege. That's not defense in depth. That's not Microsoft. That's not zero trust. So we don't do that. Okay, here is where it grabs the Graph ID from up here, creates the role, and assigns it. Does it 3 times. And then once that happens, you can go back in here, go to your API connections, and you should be able to click on Edit and Authorize once you've run that script. Another thing you have to do is go down to and authorize your Logic app to run against that resource group that the Sentinel workspace lives in. Save you guys a huge headache. I pulled out some hair trying to figure this one out. So when you go to settings, over here to middle settings, scroll down, playbook permissions. And then you'd have to give it permissions to the resource group that your Sentinel is running in. That was a missing step that caused me a bit of pain for a while. So yeah, make sure you don't miss that. And I know we just talked about a ton of permission stuff. I want to show you guys I've got all of this block written out in step by step. I just figured it was much cooler to do this live than just show you guys some screenshots on a slide deck. So if anyone's curious about the stuff that we covered, it's all documented here as well. However, I want to get to the permissions part and show you. This is where we take that script, we run it. This is what it looks like. It's got the 3 different roles, right? So you see it happen, or 4 different roles for this one. So you see it happen 4 different times. Then you come in here like we talked about, click authorize, then you can run it. It's a jungle, the API thing. That was easily the hardest part for me to figure out for getting these set up. But once you do it a few times, it becomes second nature and it really clicks. Something else I want to show you guys too, while we're talking about fun side projects. Anyone do anything cool for Halloween? This is a little side project I built out. A Raspberry Pi in the back end, put a pair of LCD screens on for eyeballs, power it up, you've got some eyes looking back at you. A little bit of tweaking, and you can make them creepier. Yeah, stick them on a pumpkin, all kinds of fun stuff. Stick them on a mask. Anyway, if you're into nerdy DIY stuff like that, give it a look. And that's all she wrote, guys. We're about at time, right? Tell us how we're doing, Wafa.
I think we're doing great. Thank you very much, Ian. And everybody, feel free to come off mute. We have Ian here with us for a couple more minutes, ask you questions. Also, we wanted to share with you some future topics that Ian would be more than happy to present to this audience. So if you would like to choose a topic of interest, please go ahead and submit the one you like, and we'll make sure to slot it for future sessions.
Yeah, if there's anything I touched on here that you want to hear more about, let us know.
Of course. I see a question in the chat or just a comment. There you go. It seems like the Defender for IoT and OT, as we talked about earlier, Ian, is a hot topic.
Well, as you can tell, I've written a lot about the Defender for IoT stuff with my soil sensors, and we've got them connected several different ways. So maybe we can use that as kind of a demonstration on the next one. Very cool. Also, origins of, if you're wondering why there's a Ninja cat riding a T-Rex, there's a little story about that here. It's a Microsoft thing. And yeah, thank you so much, guys. That's about everything I had today. Are there any, this is where we go into, I guess, question and answer. Any questions or anything you guys would like to ask?